In the early 2010s, Samsung did the unthinkable. They beat Apple at their own game. They controlled over 30% of the global smartphone market, and most of all, they were the anti-Apple and the king of Android. Something changed. Today, Samsung is losing ground, not just to Apple either, but to everyone. This is the story of how Samsung won by being the anti-Apple, and how trying to become Apple is costing them everything. To understand Samsung's fall, we have to look back at the moment the industry changed forever.
What we're going to do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen. A giant screen.
Every phone maker was forced to rethink their strategy. Many rushed to produce a new smartphone as fast as possible. HTC and Google released the T-Mobile G1 the next year, but strangely enough, Samsung didn't. From the outside, they might have seemed like another company refusing to jump onto the smartphone bandwagon, but they were different. Samsung was in a unique position, just becoming the second biggest phone producer in the world in 2007, and had massive manufacturing plants everywhere. They were also the world's leader in LED technology. So when the iPhone first appeared, Samsung didn't rush. They waited. In truth, I think this is one of the most important decisions by Samsung. While others were releasing half-baked, slow, buggy, and frankly ugly phones, Samsung spent a couple more years to develop something fantastic, the Samsung Galaxy. Their strategy wasn't to copy Apple, but to build the antithesis of Apple. While Apple sold restriction, Samsung would sell freedom. The best part of this was that Samsung quickly realized their greatest advantage was defining themselves as the opposite of Apple. Not just in hardware specs, but in fundamental user experience. Apple's pitch was polish and usability. Everything was perfectly engineered for you, but the cost was control. A sealed, non-removable battery and no expandable storage. Samsung looked at this closely and saw their opportunity. The reverse, freedom over restriction. The early Galaxy models were the embodiment of this promise. Let's start with the battery. All of the early Galaxy S phones, their biggest, most premium line, as well as the larger Galaxy Notes, all had replaceable batteries. This made it easier to troubleshoot, replace, or potentially repair your own phone. The iPhone, on the other hand, was sealed and required Apple's own tools and premium service to replace. And aside from replacing your Samsung battery, you could also add a microSD card, upgrade their storage easily and very cheaply. But for Apple, it was a revenue stream they refused to give up even to this day. Initially, iPhones were sold at tiers of 8GB, 16, and 32GB, all of which you had to choose when you bought the phone. And it's actually unbelievable how user-friendly Samsung was. There were also the many benefits of Android, but perhaps the win for Samsung came in 2016, and it was from Apple.
We're taking the headphones, an iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, to Lightning, and we're including them in the box with each device.
Apple removed the 3.5mm headphone jack from the iPhone 7, and memes about the headphone jack flooded the internet. Some were pretty good, and for Samsung, this was basically free marketing, and they weren't going to let this go to waste.
And I'm moving on.
Do you want to know what else it comes with? An audio jack. I'm just saying.
By July 2013, Samsung had officially overtaken Apple in global market share. The momentum was unstoppable. Samsung's market share peaked at 33% globally. They were selling nearly twice as many phones as Apple. 1/3 of the world's smartphone users were holding a Samsung device. People ask all the time how we're able to find footage that actually fits the story, not just generic stock clips. The honest answer is that a huge part of our workflow comes from today's sponsor, Storyblocks. Storyblocks is a stock media subscription that gives you unlimited access to high-quality video, images, music, sound effects, templates, and more, all for one predictable subscription cost. No paying per clip, no surprise fees, just everything you need in one place. The unlimited model is the real game changer. When you're not worried about burning money on every download, you can actually test ideas, experiment with different edits, and iterate until the video works. That freedom alone has made our videos better. Also, all of their content is created by real artists from around the world, no generative AI. Just real footage, real moments, and visuals that feel human, which makes a massive difference when you're trying to tell a real story. Everything you download is fully licensed and royalty-free forever. You can even whitelist your YouTube channel inside Storyblocks to help prevent claims, which means you spend less time worrying about copyright and more time creating. For years now, Storyblocks has been baked into how we work. It saves time, removes friction, and gives us way more flexibility when shaping a video from idea to final cut. To get started with unlimited stock media downloads at one set price, head to storyblocks.com/logicallyanswered or click the link in the description. Thank you to Storyblocks for supporting our videos. Apple was still dominating in the US, but globally, the usability, price, and flexibility of Samsung were hard to beat. Samsung had established itself as the king of Android and the perfect alternative to Apple's restrictive ecosystem, at least for a while. Samsung soon realized they had a problem. Despite crushing Apple in volume and market share, Apple was winning where it mattered most to businesses. Samsung's early advantage was more freedom, more features, but the deeper business incentive is profit, the most important incentive, and the profits didn't lie. Let's revisit that global market share. Despite Samsung's dominance, Apple routinely captured 90% of global smartphone industry profits. iPhone sales only accounted for 15% of globally sold units in the same period, meaning 15% market share, but 90% of the profits. For Samsung, that was hard to ignore. Apple's strategy of control and premium pricing was a profit machine, so Samsung began to make some questionable decisions. Samsung began a slow, calculated dismantling of that beloved identity. They started walking back the very things that had made them victorious. The Galaxy S6 in 2015 launched with a sealed, non-removable battery. The flagship line would never see a user-replaceable battery again. And since the battery was sealed, you can guess what else was removed. The S6 also removed the microSD support. Apparently, this was because of new technology used in the S6, but deep down, everyone knew. Now, you had to pick from Samsung's lineup just like Apple, 32, 64, or 128GB variant. Adding your own storage would hurt their profit margins, so they removed their ability to do so. Longtime users were furious, and the backlash was immense. I've been a Samsung supporter for years. I may be shopping for Android alternatives that still offer a removable battery and SD card storage. Samsung actually listened, and the S7 would bring back microSD. A lot of people were very disappointed we didn't have a microSD in the S6, and its return has been one of the most positive reactions to the S7. But unfortunately, it wouldn't stay. In the Galaxy S21 lineup, the microSD slot was gone again, and this time it wouldn't return. To make matters worse, the S21 lineup wouldn't include a charger or headphones in the box. Apple began doing the same in 2020, supposedly to reduce carbon emissions, but this was clearly just to cut costs. Samsung would use the same environmental excuse despite initially clowning Apple for it. They were all signature elements of the Apple experience. Samsung was systematically adopting the very restrictions Apple used that annoyed customers. But worse and most ironic of all was the Galaxy Note 10. It launched without the 3.5mm jack. The company that spent millions mocking its rival for removing a port had now removed its own port. The Growing Up campaign ad was quietly removed from their major channels, but you can still find it on a few localized ones. It was a double standard, hilarious but also sad. Samsung was conforming to all of Apple's standards. Samsung had become what they mocked. They were the second Apple but Android. The anti-Apple identity and the entire foundation of their success was officially dead. But this attempt to copy Apple's success formula came with some unforeseen consequences. Over the past 8 years, we've posted 1,100 videos, yet we still haven't crossed 1 million subscribers. We are close though, and I believe 2026 is the year, and if you subscribe right now, we can actually make that a reality. Longtime customers weren't happy. This sentiment was everywhere. Samsung's core supporters started abandoning ship, and soon the numbers reflected it. In October 2022, Samsung's global market share dropped below Apple's for the first time since 2013. Samsung had dropped into second place, and it continued to decline. But it gets stranger. The same collapse was happening in the US market too, the most premium market where Apple dominates. Wouldn't Samsung be growing here given their Apple-esque approach? What's happening? A clue comes from the third place on the global ranking, which is no one? It's not a giant brand, but all the smaller models of phones, which shows us what's really happening. The people who chose Samsung for its freedom had little reason to stay. They were getting the same closed-off experience, but without the Apple ecosystem or polish. And now, the phone market was dramatically different. Stiff competition within the Android world from Google Pixel, OnePlus, Nothing, Xiaomi, Oppo, and many more. It's not clear who exactly Samsung phones are even for. Brands like Huawei and Xiaomi were releasing new phones at great prices, and they were good. And something else was happening too. The gap between premium and budget was shrinking. Sure, the camera might not be as good and it might slow down a bit, but you could get a pretty cheap phone and it'd still look amazing, and you'd get 80% of the experience. And these brands weren't just cheap, rather strategically cheap. They were cheap where it mattered. Huawei pushed aggressive R&D and high-quality features at a way lower price, while Xiaomi went for the same processing power, the same screen, just way cheaper. The Xiaomi Mi 5, for example, was $400, yet had a great screen, fingerprint sensor, a camera with 4K video, and lots of RAM, all in 2016 as well. This was a big problem for Samsung in particular. Remember, they were the bigger global player, and in markets like India, along with Southeast Asia and the Middle East, they started losing. In 2015, Xiaomi sold 70 million smartphones, a 23% jump from the previous year, while Huawei jumped 58%. Then in 2017, Xiaomi overtook Samsung as the market leader in India. They were also cheap in other ways, like Xiaomi's direct-to-consumer sales with the reliance on flash sales compared to Samsung's traditional in-store sales. Samsung's strategy of releasing an impossibly confusing number of models also didn't help. There's the S, but also the Note, the A, the J, and the M, each supposedly targeting different demographics. But who are each of these actually for? Budget users, mid-range, premium, all of them? This is something Apple does exceptionally well, and even though Samsung is chasing them, they're still trying to appeal to everyone. But when you target everyone, you target no one. There was no clear identity. No obvious reason to pick one Samsung over another, let alone over a competitor. The result was an identity crisis that led to a market collapse. Samsung was no longer the obvious choice for consumers seeking freedom, and they weren't Apple for consumers seeking the premium ecosystem either. Android users began to migrate elsewhere. The last nail in the coffin came in 2024 when Apple officially overtook them as the top seller of smartphones globally. The king of Android had been dethroned. Samsung chased Apple's restrictions, sealed phones, fewer included accessories, fewer user choice features, all without having Apple's moat in the same way. They tried to win the profit game at the expense of their core identity. But Samsung doesn't have Apple's moat or their ecosystem, so when the market got crowded with a lot of great and affordable Android phones, Samsung lost the one thing that made it the obvious Android pick, being the best alternative instead of being the worst Apple. Ironically, Nothing Phone ran into the same trap as Samsung, and they're paying the price too. Check out this video to learn more, but until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.